Hello, everybody. I got the shower idea to do a Stormlight key scenes tier list. I will be going through the top 60 or so key scenes, or at least key scenes to me, in the Stormlight archive, and I will be ranking them from worst to best. I apologize if one of your favorite scenes did not make it in. There's only so many scenes I can do, or else this list would be a long list, 100 scenes long. So if I missed something that you're curious my thoughts about, feel free to comment, and I will link the tier list below if you would like to fill it out yourself. We are going to start with F. These are the only, F and D are going to be the only scenes that I think are either poorly written or I do not care for, and I will explain as I go. So, Stormlight Archive tier list of key scenes, F tier. Lopin's third ideal in Dawnshard. Lopin is a comedic character throughout the entire Stormlight archive, and when he arrives at his third ideal, it does not land for me. I won't get into too much detail. If you're curious, I can answer it in further detail, maybe in the comment section later, but I do not like Lopin's third ideal and where he ends up with it. But I don't want to get into too much detail in the tier list. The only other scene in F tier is an Oathbringer, the Heart of the Revel. This scene is very well written. It freaks me out. I am scared of this scene. I dread it every time I read Oathbringer. I won't say much more of it besides it is an extremely well written horror scene, and I do not do well with horror. And that's all that's in F tier. Moving on to D tier. Okay, Tin's death scene in Words of Radiance. This is also the reveal that Shallan has a shard blade. I am not a huge fan of this scene simply because Tin is such a forgettable character to me, in my opinion. The Shallan Shardblade reveal is a good one on the first read. On the second read, this scene has no impact, no punch, and I will be talking about that more with other scenes. If another scene is really good on a reread, but not very good on a first read, or vice versa, it could bring it up or down on the tier list, and I'll talk about that further. And then the only other one in D tier is Lift confronting darkness in Edge Dancer. So this scene doesn't work for me because I don't like Nail as a character. I really enjoy Lift. I really enjoy Lift in Edge Dancer. I really enjoy her in Rhythm of War, but I don't like Nail as an antagonist. I don't understand his motives. I don't understand his character. He just doesn't have enough page time for me to fully understand his motives, his character. Like, I understand his reasoning on paper, but I'm not a fan of Nail as a character, which brings Edge Dancer down for me just as a whole. Moving on to D+, a little bit better. The only two in D+ for me is the Fall of Kholinar. Okay, the Fall of Kholinar. Epic scene. I'm sure this would be great in adaptation. I do not, Brandon. I do not get enough sense of urgency, a sense of danger, and I don't get enough imagery in the Fall of Kholinar. I understand that in the scenes that you write, I understand that the city is falling. I understand the stakes that are involved, but at no point am I in fear of serious danger to our heroes. Now, that being said, there'll be Elokar's death scene I will rank separately. But as far as Kaladin, Shallan, and Adolin, it feels like an odd time that they would be in genuine danger for their lives, and for me to feel invested in that. So for that reason, it doesn't rank super highly for me. And then the only other scene in D+ will be Moash becoming Vyre. Up until this point, I think Moash, you could argue Moash views himself as the good guy. Moash can justify anything that he's done up until this point of, I deserved that, I earned that revenge, that death. This one, however, is setting up Vyre, Moash, to be a key player for Odium into Rhythm of War. And I don't understand the character leap for him. I don't understand the justification that you can go and kill this herald. Up until this point, you have worshipped this character as a part of the Vorin Church, and maybe Moash doesn't really care about the Vorin Church, but he's been raised in Alethkar. He, for all intents and purposes, should be Vorin, and for him to be handed a knife by a Voidbringer, and him being perfectly okay with killing Yezrian, I don't understand. I need more context for the scene to be understood fully by me, if that makes sense. Moving on to C tier. Okay, the Oathgates in Shadesmar. So this one is one of those scenes where it's really cool on a first read. I really enjoyed the Shadesmar journey. I really enjoyed the two big Spren guarding the Oathgate as an obstacle in Shadesmar on my first read. On subsequent reads of Oathbringer, they are blocking the path to an epic scene that I just want to get to. I understand the world building already. They don't add anything for me. So that's why they're down in C tier. But the first time I read them, I really enjoyed them. Every other reading after that, I don't enjoy them. All right, next one will be Dalinar versus Ishar in Rhythm of War. Okay, so this one, I get really creeped out by the dead Spren. It is another horror scene on the page, which I don't handle well, just as a personal note. And then the Dalinar versus Ishar does a very good job of foreshadowing to book 5, but it's a little anticlimactic. Not much happens in the scene besides we're probably going to meet again. There isn't that much progress besides finding dead Spren, which, you know, is a decent drop, but I guess I was expecting more. All right, the Chasm Fiend hunt in the Way of Kings. This is the scene where you're introduced to Dalinar, Adolin, Elokar, Sadeas, Renarin. I don't know if Renarin is there or not. And as an intro scene, it's good. It's fine action sequence of our young strapping guys who are going on a Chasm Fiend hunt. On rereads, it doesn't add too much layering to characters. But it shouldn't really. It's an introduction to characters. It shouldn't have too much depth, but it's just a little bit slow on rereads, which is why it's down in C tier. And the last one in C tier, which may be a little bit controversial, is Taln's return in the Way of Kings epilogue. I love Taln. I really enjoy Taln and everything he stands for, everything his character is. The Way of Kings epilogue falls a little flat for me because I don't understand the impact of what just happened. And I'm not faulting Brandon Sanderson for that. I have read an entire book and I still have no idea what a herald is. And he finally shows back up at the end of the Way of Kings, and there's not much punch to his words, or for me at least, on a reread. I fully understand the context and the implications of what is just happening, and it still doesn't have that punch for me. So I feel like there's a lot of missed potential with a reread or point of view on the Way of Kings epilogue. All right, moving into C+. The battle versus Re-Sephir in Oathbringer. So this one is good. It's a little bit anticlimactic because they chase her off and don't learn that much. As I think our hero's not learning too much besides the pillar, which is revealed, I suppose. But they don't learn that much about Re-Sephir herself. And part of that can contribute, or I think that type of thing can contribute to people calling Oathbringer slow, where you'll have a conflict, you'll have a mystery, and it'll reveal something that you weren't expecting it to reveal, and then you'll be frustrated about the thing that you thought you were on track for, if that makes sense. The whole build up to it, it's a little long, and the scene itself is good. That's why it's in, C+ and not lower, but it doesn't quite pack the punch for me that some of these other scenes do. Okay, Kaladin shielding the High Storm in Oathbringer. This scene is fairly forgettable, and I'm not sure why. This scene, he is in part 1 of Oathbringer, maybe part 2 of Oathbringer, and he's gotten to know the Parshman at the beginning of Oathbringer, and he flies to a city, and there's a bunch of people stuck outside in a High Storm, and he shields the High Storm for them, and then the Fused come and chase him off, and he tries to save as many lives as he can. And obviously this scene is trying to set up his 4th ideal at the end of Rhythm of War, and it's because he can't save everyone, and that really bothers him. There's just something about it that is forgettable, and I don't know why not. I don't know why. I haven't read it. I don't remember it well enough to tell you why that is, but here it sits, and I don't know if I can put it higher because it didn't impact me that much. All right, Nightblood's Rampage at the end of Oathbringer. So Nightblood, I'm going to talk about Warbreaker a little bit. So if you haven't read Warbreaker, go do that, or skip to a couple minutes. Nightblood, I think, is a fundamental problem in any book he shows up in, because we have seen 4, maybe 5, or 3 or 4 or 5, depending on how you count, books with Nightblood in it, and we still don't understand Nightblood. We have seen a decent amount of page count for Nightblood, and you still don't quite understand what is happening with Nightblood. You don't understand the rules, which maybe, I'm sure those rules are coming in Stormlight 5, with it being Szeth's book and all. But Nightblood, there's something a little bit dysfunctional for Nightblood, because it seems like he can destroy anything that the heroes need to get out of. And I think there's a literary term for that, but I don't know. I don't have an English degree, so I can't tell you what it is. But C+, there's a couple flaws with Nightblood. It is an epic scene. I do enjoy it. Lift saves Szeth from the sword. It's really cool. But a little bit dysfunctional because of Nightblood and his mechanics. All right. Yasna soulcasting thugs into fire in the Way of Kings. So this one is really good on a first read. The entire scene, you're like, what is happening? You're watching Shallan trying to understand what has just happened through the trauma of almost being killed, and you're trying to understand the physics, the laws of physics of this soulcaster, and she's cheating, but you don't get to know that she's cheating until the end of the book. So everything that you're watching is kind of fake and false of what the reader's been led to believe of how soulcasting works. So it sits here because it's a little bit frustrating, especially on a first read. On a reread, it's actually pretty cool. It pulls it up, I think. On a first read, it is frustrating that you have no chance of understanding what is happening. Makes sense. Okay, Fleet. This marks the first of the 4 Hoid tales that he tells within the Stormlight Archive. Fleet is a good one. It's fine. It helps Kaladin, obviously, in his arc in Words of Radiance and where he's going in Words of Radiance. I just think it's the weakest of the 4, and that's why it sits down here in C+. It's fine. I enjoy it. Fleet kept running. It's a great quote to put on your throw pillow. And moving on into B tier. Okay, so there are 2 ones at the bottom of this, which I will reveal here. Okay, the last clap in Words of Radiance. This scene is only so low because of what it has to rival in Words of Radiance. This scene is when Szeth comes to kill Dalinar, but they think it's to kill Elhokar. They rush Elhokar to safety, but he's actually there to kill Dalinar. So Dalinar, Adolin, and Kaladin fight him. They jump out the window, or they fall out the window, yada, yada, yada. This scene is actually really good, except there's so many epic action sequences in Words of Radiance that it has to rival that it's fair that a lot of people forget about it, I think. It's good. It's helps Kaladin take his job way more seriously, and it gives the implications of him turning over his job to Moash way heavier at the end of the book. So that's why it sits here in B tier. Good scene. All right, the date scene between Shallan and Adolin in Words of Radiance. Fine scene, nothing grand, nothing fantastic in this scene. The humor is good, genuinely well-written humor, and it sits in B tier for me. Not too much else to say beyond that. All right, on to the rest of B tier here. This scene is kind of coupled with the scene I was just talking about. I understand that it's 2 different, guys in the scene, but it sits in the Shallan humor in Words of Radiance pile for me. It's fine. I enjoy it. Like, I did genuinely laugh probably my first couple reads of this. On a reread, there's not much here. You just read past it. It's fluff. Moving on. All right. The prelude to the Stormlight Archive. Leaving the swords and sealing Taln in damnation. Great on a reread. On a first read, no idea what's happening. Does it pique your interest of, I really want to know what's happening? I think so. I think it piqued my interest of, that was cool, I think. I don't know. I'll just keep reading and maybe that'll make sense one day. And one day it does. It's just a long ways in. All right. Next one. Kaladin's third ideal. At the end of Words of Radiance, I will protect those who cannot protect themselves, even those I hate. This one This is a good scene. However, somebody on Twitter pointed out to me that Syl randomly starts speaking in Old English. Stretch forth thy hand. Like she becomes an old British, like from the 1600s speaking Old English. And ever since somebody pointed that out to me, I cannot get that out of my head. That it's so out of character for Syl that she becomes so dramatic. Like she's fairly dramatic, but she becomes so old English speak, and that's so strange. It doesn't appear anywhere else in the Stormlight archive, and now you'll also never be able to unsee that dialogue if you never noticed that. So that's why it comes down B tier. If it weren't for that, if the dialogue had been good and without it having to be like old speak, then I think it would be pushed up to B plus or A to me. I Am a Stick, classic, B tier, right in the middle of the pack, good humor, not much else. Okay, Arriving in Urithiru. This one may seem a little bit out of place and that not much like grand happened at the end of Words of Radiance, but I remember this one specifically on a reread. I'm sorry, this one specifically on a first read is really good. I remember thinking to myself, wow, we're finally at Urithiru. What does it look like? And it gives you a very great visual, and it sets up Oathbringer tremendously. That you're finally in Urithiru. What can they figure out in Urithiru? What are they going to find? How are they going to use it? I think Arriving in Urithiru is great. I really enjoy it. Okay, Adolin killing Sadeas. Great scene. Fabulous for Sadeas dying, obviously, and for what it means for Adolin's character. It sits in B tier because I'm not a fan of Adolin taking Sadeas' life into his own hands. And I understand that the scene is supposed to make me angry at Adolin, or maybe it's just supposed to make me cheer for Adolin, but it makes me angry at Adolin because, yes, this needed to happen. No, it should not have been at the hands of Adolin, and he knows that, and he holds himself to a higher standard than that. So he should do better, and he knows it. It sets him up perfectly for his arc in the later books, which I'm a huge fan of. All right, Kaladin versus Amaram in Oathbringer. Good scene. It didn't quite live up to my expectations, though. Obviously, you know the scene is coming at some point. Ever since you read the end of part 3 of The Way of Kings is when you find out that Amaram betrayed Kaladin, and that's how he became a slave. You know the scene is coming at some point. It doesn't quite live up to my expectations, and I can get into that further if somebody wants to ask. But it sits at B. It's a great scene. And Rock is the one that ends up killing Amaram, which I think is actually a really cool twist, and you're not expecting that. I don't know if I was expecting Kaladin to kill Amaram, because Kaladin's all about protecting as opposed to aggressing. But Rock is the one who takes matters into his own hands and kills Amaram to defend Kaladin. Really good scene, really good implications moving forward. It's good. And the fourth bridge. This one is in B tier because I love the imagery. I read those Rhythm of War early chapters released by Tor before Rhythm of War came out, and having the fourth bridge descend upon Hearthstone, I loved it. I thought reading those preview chapters was awesome. The science involved, Navani being in her happy place, just watching engineering at work, Kaladin zipping around defending the bridge. I love that entire first sequence of Rhythm of War. It's really, really, really good. Okay, moving into B plus and A. This is where it really starts to get good for me. This is the type of scene where it redefines my expectations of fantasy, or my expectations of a book in general, where it raises the bar to, oh, this is what literature is capable of. That is really cool. I'm a big fan of that. With that said, here is B plus. Okay, Dalinar visiting Cultivation at the end of Oathbringer. Well, flashback, but you get revealed at the end of Oathbringer. This one could be A plus tier, except there's one line in this scene where Dalinar says he ends up breaking down and asking for forgiveness, but I don't remember it. He either doesn't remember what he was originally going to ask, or he's afraid to ask what he was originally going to ask, and you never find out. But you're left to imply that he was going to ask to have his pain taken away, right? But he doesn't. And you don't get the revelation of, was that Dalinar specifically choosing to not have his pain taken away, or was he forgetting what he originally was going to ask? This is really important for Dalinar's character, that if he chooses to hold on to his pain and just ask for forgiveness as old Dalinar, and so then he gets his memories peeled back and then slowly reapplied to him, and so that he can take the next step when it's appropriate for him. I love that as a plot concept. I love it as a character concept, that they can move forward once they've healed from it without the pain, and then you reapply the pain and they can still move forward because they see what type of person they can be without it. And there's more to talk about this, but I will leave that for another scene here in a little bit. Okay, at the end of Void of Kings, Taravangian revealing his hospitals, quote unquote, and he reveals that he's the one behind Szeth. I remember I was listening to this at work for my first time, and my jaw hit the floor when Szeth finally meets the person. You don't really know Taravangian that well at this point, but his fake hospitals collecting the epigraphs, the death rattles, and he's the one behind Szeth's killings. Great. Like, it's such a great reveal. I love the writing. It's got good reread potential. It's a really good chapter. Okay, Shallan running from the cryptics. So this one is one of those scenes where it's great on a first read, not so great on a reread. There are a couple Easter eggs you can pick out on a reread, but that first read value of this scene, where she's just running through the streets of Kharbranth and you have no idea what's happening to her, I was intrigued. I did not know where this was going. I was thrilled when it's revealed later to you exactly what's happening. I thought Shallan's ending in the Way of Kings was great. All right, Rissyn earning her Dawn Shard. I loved this scene because you still don't know what a Dawn Shard is at the end of Dawn Shard. I still don't know, at least. I'm sure the wiki does, but I actually haven't really looked into it that much. But Rissyn earns that. I believe that's a really good word for it, because the Sleepless could kill her and keep the Dawn Shard safe, but she earns her place to keep the Dawn Shard. And that's really important for a lot of, I think it's going to be really important for a lot of things moving forward. So for her to be housing a Dawn Shard in her, maybe in her gem heart, I don't know. And with Chiri Chiri and everything that happens in Dawn Shard at the end of Dawn Shard, I love. B+. Okay, Kaladin and Shallan talking in the chasms in Words of Radiance. This is not the scene where they've just killed the Chasm Fiend. This is the one before that, where Kaladin accuses her of never knowing pain, and Shallan reveals to him that she has felt pain and just doesn't show it. And Kaladin has the good line of, and she smiled anyway, and he has no idea how and no idea why, but she can smile through it, and he really appreciates that about her. It's a really powerful scene. I really enjoy it. Okay, this next one. I know I docked the Fall of Kholinar as not one of my favorite scenes, D+ tier. However, the powerful writing of Elhokar's death is really, really good. It's a little bit, I will say that him almost swearing the first ideal of the Knights Radiant is a little bit cheesy. I'm not sure if it's quite earned for Elhokar. However, that is a small nitpick in a very, very well written scene. Moash shows up and dashes our hopes that Elhokar will have a good redemption arc here, and everything is so chaotic, and Kaladin freezes, which is really important to reference later. It's such an important scene in Oathbringer, and it's such an important scene in the Stormlight Archive. It's a really well done one. All right, Adolin defending Nodum in Rhythm of War. I will say, I am one of those people that does not like Adolin until his arc in Oathbringer and Rhythm of War. He has a very, very good one in the later books. Up until that point, I don't see him very much as a good character. He's very surface level for me until Oathbringer, and especially in Rhythm of War. We'll get to it later. He is one of my favorite scenes in the entire Stormlight Archive later. But he rides to Nodum's defense because he knows it's right. And as far as he knows, Nodum isn't in a real danger of his life, but Adolin is. but he goes and defends him anyway because of what Odium did for them in the previous book. I love this scene. It's a very, very good scene. Very underrated scene, I think. Okay, A Light by Which to See. This is the scene of Kaladin being strung up in the High Storm in the Way of Kings. Iconic scene. You have been hinted at of the dangers of high storms up until this point, and he is finally pissed off the Alethi Light Eyes to get him strung up in the High Storm, and you get Syl defending him from the wind, and he's holding on for dear life, and then they bring him down, and Teft heals him with Stormlight, and Almighty cast from heaven to dwell in our hearts, it is true, is the quote. Very iconic scene. I love it. It's only in B+ because there's a lot of really good things it has to contend with, but there it sits. All right, heading into A. Still on the border of redefining fantasy, redefining literature for me. Once we get into A+ and S, that will be, I've just read something that redefines me. This impacts me personally, and that is really important to me. And I hold those, most of them. Some of them are just great literature, but don't affect me personally. But A tier. All right, Discovering Rhythm of War. Okay, this scene is, I rushed through Rhythm of War on my first read. I read it right when it came out. I was really excited, and a lot of the Navani stuff kind of went over my head the first time. The second time I read Rhythm of War, all of Navani's content jumped for me. I thought it was so good. Navani in Rhythm of War. Discovering the Rhythm of War with Raboniel, understanding that, proving that it doesn't have to end in violence. You can unite both singer and human. I mean, I can only assume it's going to be extremely important going into Stormlight 5. So, great scene. Jumped way high for me on second read. Venli showing Leshwi Stormlight. On my first read, I appreciated this scene. I thought it was good. On my second, I did not fully grasp the implications of Leshwi having an honor spren to herself at one time. Leshwi says she used to have an honor spren, which would imply that she probably used to be a windrunner, which has huge implications for the Roshar moving forwards and what that can mean in the back half of Stormlight 5, or even in this next book. That scene alone makes me so excited for what is coming. Venli healing her mother. This is so important for Venli as a character. It's a quiet scene, it's a small scene at the end of Rhythm of War, but it's so important. It circles Venli back to what started this all for her. She began to see her mother slipping into forgetfulness. The word, medical term is escaping me right now. Venli's mother, her body is failing her. And she originally sets out, I'm going to find a form of power to heal my mother. And everything happens between the Way of Kings, really, and Rhythm of War. And at the very end of Rhythm of War, she finally circles back and heals her mother. Her goal one was to heal her mother, and she accomplishes it. So she can move on from everything that she has done that has hurt other people, that has helped other people, and she can build on that. It is very beautifully put by Brandon that she finally circles back to heal her mother, and that she was able to do that. Okay, the iconic Szeth son of Vellano, truthless of Shinovar, wore white on the day he was Skilla King. Okay, so this one, it's good. I mean, this prologue speaks for itself. It's going to be talked about for years. That the prologue for the Way of Kings is so good and so, like I said, iconic. There's plenty of Easter eggs for a rereader. It's fast-paced and action-packed for a first-time reader. It really hooks you, and you're like, I don't know what's happening, but what's happening is really cool. It's awesome. Okay, the Rift. Everything that needs to be said about this scene has already been said. This scene is so important for the reader to understand exactly who Dalinar is, and what Dalinar is capable of. It's extremely important to understand the dangers of Dalinar's past and what he can become and what Odium is pushing him back towards and what he's been building Dalinar since his youth as. It's such an important scene. It's so well written. It's so gut punching and horrifying and gross what Dalinar does. And the ability to deconstruct a character that you already have on a pedestal and then rebuild him to that pedestal and prove to the reader and prove to the character that just because this was in your past does not define who you are is such a cool concept. It is such a cool concept and so beautifully executed by Brandon Sanderson. I cannot get enough of Dalinar in Oathbringer. Okay, Kaladin and Shallan versus the Chasm Fiend. Great action sequence. One of the best action sequences, I think, in the Stormlight Archive. Also great for rereader Easter eggs. There are certain key things that happen in this scene that are really important to catch on to. His detail department, I think, had a field day trying to keep this one straight with what the reveals with Shallan that was coming 2 books later. It doesn't come for a long time. That she gives Kaladin her shard blade, but also has pattern with her. So did she just give Kaladin testament, and then Shallan's shard blade changes shape after they've killed the Chasm Fiend? There's several key details that are for rereaders that are in this scene, and it's so good. Really, really good. Okay, Journey Before Destination, you bastard. Once again, this scene jumped several tiers for me on a second read, because Navani jumped several tiers for me on a second read. I didn't think this was really impactful for me on my first read. I was like, oh, that's really cool. Navani is a bondsmith. Anyway, back to Kaladin. But on a second read, Navani really demanded more of my attention, and Rhythm of War in general demanded more of my attention. I really appreciated Rhythm of War far more than I ever did on that speed read the first time. So this one jumped. Speaking of scenes that jumped, I completely missed this on my first read of Rhythm of War. This scene is at the end of Rhythm of War, right before the trial, and Shallan and Vale argue and tug back and forth of, am I worth saving? You're not formless yet. You are Shallan and you are worth fighting for. Apologies. You are worth fighting for. It's really important that you understand that the fight is not over, but the fight might be over for Vale. This might be Vale's death scene. She says, my purpose is complete. You no longer need me. And Shallan absorbs Vale into herself. It's such a powerful scene. I cannot believe I missed it on my first read. Genuinely on my second read, I read it and did not know the scene was coming. I did not remember it at all. I don't know if I dozed off or blocked it out or what, but this scene is so powerful, so good. Hidden gem in Rhythm of War. Okay, Teft and Fenrirana's deaths, the end of Rhythm of War. This one is ranked so highly because Moash is such a good villain in Rhythm of War. He knows exactly how to attack Kaladin, and it's not by killing him, it's by putting him through hell. And you do that by attacking his friends and setting up anti-Stormlight, anti-Voidlight, so that literally 2 chapters after you discover anti-Voidlight and anti-Stormlight, you then understand, oh, Spren's lives are in danger, and then a Spren dies like a couple chapters later. Really well executed by Brandon Sanderson, and it couldn't have been to a more important character to Kaladin. I think Moash even says, yeah, I was going to kill his dad, but I realized that Teft is actually more important to Kaladin than his dad is right now. So this death is so good, but it's because of what it means to Kaladin and what it does to Kaladin. Really well done. The entire ending sequence to Rhythm of War is so good. Okay, young Renarin comforting Dalinar. This one may seem out of place. It's a quiet scene. It's a small scene in Oathbringer, but it's an Oathbringer flashback. Dalinar has killed Evie. He's become an alcoholic, and Renarin it's young Renarin. He just wants to comfort his father, and he brings alcohol to him after Dalinar has gone on this rampage of not being able to find alcohol. And it breaks him, and he just breaks down crying and realizes he can't go on like this anymore. Such a tender and heartfelt scene that Brandon Sanderson puts into Oathbringer here, that I feel like it honestly could be cut from like an editing point of view, that it doesn't push the plot forward too much, but Brandon Sanderson leaves in these very tender, very important character scenes that just give characters more depth and nothing else. That does not push the plot forward. It just looks at characters and pours depth into characters. Both Renarin and Adolin and Dalinar in this scene. It's fabulous. Another hidden gem, as I said, but this time in Oathbringer, it's really good. Okay, the Ayla Steely in Oathbringer. This is the reveal that humans were the original Voidbringers. They came with Odium from Ashen, I believe. I don't think that's a spoiler to anybody. This is a really good scene on your first read. Genuine shock, genuine that a lot of people said that, oh yeah, I saw that coming. I did not see this coming at all. And I really enjoyed this on the podcast, watching my fellow podcast hosts' reactions to this, because this was such a reveal for me, and it was to them as well. I really enjoy sharing this reveal with other people and seeing their reactions to it. Maybe the best reveal in the Stormlight Archive for that purpose of sharing it with others. Very, very good. Okay, Hoid saving design at the end of Oathbringer. Hoid, we'll talk about this. Yes, we'll talk about this with the scene coming up later. But Hoid, up until the end of Oathbringer, is not focused on saving people. He's focused on fighting Odium. However, there's a key scene with Shallan in Kholinar that rattles Hoid, and he says, I should have been more careful. I should be looking out for more people. And then this entire epilogue of Oathbringer is Hoid walking around Kholinar, trying to mend the damage that's been done by the singers, by the fused that have attacked Kholinar. And he's taking his time, one of the most important, influential, powerful characters in the entire Cosmere. He's taking his time to walk about Kholinar and do what's right. He unites families together. He takes a young couple who has lost their child and unites it with a child who needs young parents to help them survive. And he just goes about trying to save people, and he saves Design, who he knows Elhokar was about to bond. He goes into the palace to save her, and it's really impactful. I think for Hoid as a character, I don't really view Hoid as having a character arc, but he has one in Oathbringer, and it's really, really cool. It's really refreshing, actually, to have the mentor character have an arc like that. Okay, Shallan confronting Elhokar's court. This one ranks really highly for me because you are finally having Shallan accomplish what she's capable of in this scene. You know that she's becoming such a good character and a strong character, and she's finally here at the Shattered Plane. She's talking to Dalinar, she's talking to Adolin, she's talking to Kaladin, and this is such a good opening to her character for our other characters. I really enjoy this scene. It's really powerful for me that she can embrace the trial of talking in front of everybody, and she's scared, but she does it, and it's really impressive. And to finish off this splits it splits the personal versus the literary reveals for me. The Kaladin Adolin duel is really impactful for me on a literary. It's like the Charge of the Rohirrim in the Lord of the Rings, if you have ever seen the Lord of the Rings. It proves what can be accomplished in a fantasy book that cannot be accomplished in a non-fiction book. There are so many key lines in this scene that are so iconic and so memorable, and it's so action-packed and thrilling that you get chills every time you read it. It's famous for a reason. This one, if the Stormlight Archive ever gets an adaptation, this scene is going to have to be the money scene. You're going to have to nail this scene for people to enjoy Words of Radiance as an adaptation. All right, moving on to A+. This is where Stormlight Archives begins to be a personal retrospective of my own life, my own character, of, wow, if I was in that situation, would I do what that character just did? And let's start with the Recreants. The Recreants first appears to us in Dalinar's flashback vision, and you don't really quite understand what's going on, but by the end of it, Dalinar seems to piece it together of what exactly is happening here. It is so, I hate using this word, but this scene is so epic and grand, and you can fully grasp you don't obviously know exactly what's happening, but you can appreciate the weight of what just happened and the sorrow that is happening in this scene. And it is portrayed so well that you understand, I don't exactly know what happened, but whatever just happened is really important and meant a lot to a lot of people. It's very, very good. It's the type of scene where I feel like the scene with Taln returning lacks this weight that I'm talking about, but the Recreant certainly has it. All right, the next two kind of go in tandem. Dirty Tricks, the Epilogue of Rhythm of War, and King Taravangian ascending to Odium in Rhythm of War. So these two scenes are ranked so highly simply because they are such good setups for Stormlight 5. By the end of it keeps Stormlight Archive readers engaged. If Odium were to be untouched moving into Stormlight 5, it almost feels like he's already been beaten. But because Odium dies, or because Reyes dies in book 4, which is something I don't think anybody was expecting, it puts such a wonderful twist on the story moving into Stormlight 5. It changes the outcomes of the duel that we know is coming from like 5 different outcomes to like 70 different. And I'm not kidding. Like, there are so many different outcomes that can happen in this duel because of these two scenes, because of Dirty Tricks and the Ascending a couple chapters previous. It is such a good way to set up your final book and get people excited for the final book, because you've set up this villain for so long, and then you twist the villain into somebody else who you also detest, but you have then combined them into something way more intimidating. It is so clever and so well done. Obviously, Sanderson had that mapped out for a long time, and it's really well executed. All right, the rest of A+. Okay, Tien's death scene. Tien's death scene works so well because Kaladin is such a good character. I don't think anybody would argue that Kaladin is not a well-written character. But Tien's death scene is so good because Kaladin's... You don't get it until the end of the Way of Kings when you've gotten to know Kaladin for 800 pages at that point. And Kaladin's character is so well written that you understand exactly what this death scene means and how it has affected Kaladin up until this point. When you finally get that curtain reveal of how Tien died, and Kaladin's role in it, it is so impactful and so well written because Kaladin is charging back to save Dalinar, and you know he's just made that decision to go back and save someone he cares about, even though he knows that he has failed doing so in the past. It's so... yeah. I mean, people have talked about it so much. This book's 10 years old now, 12 years old now, my gosh. And yeah, this scene ages so well. I think will be a staple of fantasy literature, that revealing something during the climax of a book so that you fully understand the character as he's fighting is such brilliance from Brandon Sanderson, really. Okay, The Wandersail. I have said, if you watch the podcast, I've said that The Wandersail is my favorite chapter in the Stormlight Archive. I said that when we read it the first time. I think this tier list disproved that. I still rank it extremely highly, but I'm fairly confident this cannot be my favorite chapter because it's not even... There are 2 other Hoid stories, let alone other scenes, that are better than this story for me. The Wandersail is great. I enjoy the whimsical note of Hoid. He's not revealing everything that he is, or pretty much anything that he is, but Kaladin is there to listen, even if he doesn't know that he should be there to listen. It is such a good Sanderson scene that he puts in here, and it has a very dear place in my heart. But there are several scenes that have passed it for me, and it's no longer my favorite chapter. But I think doing this tier list proved that to me, that this is no longer my favorite chapter. Okay, the Honor Chasm, chapter 12, I believe, of The Way of Kings. This is the hook of the Stormlight Archive, really. The entire Stormlight Archive is Kaladin's arc in The Way of Kings. He is done 11 chapters of setup, and in the 12th chapter, Kaladin decides, okay, I'm going to save these men. And that's your hook for the story of the Way of Kings. How is he going to save these men? How is he going to escape? And it is such a devastating scene that Syl shows up with Blackbane and tries to, because she thinks that's what Kaladin needs to get him out of this. And it breaks Kaladin's heart. What more can I say? I don't know. It's such a well-crafted scene. I'm sorry I'm saying the same thing over and over, but okay. Kaladin Stormblessed reborn in Rhythm of War. He's just set his 4th ideal, and his brands fall off his head. He saves his father, and he is no longer a slave, or shash, which is dangerous. It is so well earned that his brands finally fall off in this scene, and the imagery in this scene is fabulous. Brandon Sanderson stops to describe the scene to you as Kaladin is swearing this 4th ideal. The fact that Bridge 4 symbol appears on his armor is also awesome. It couldn't land better for me, I think, in this scene. And it comes after one of my favorite scenes in the Stormlight Archive, which we'll talk about here in a second. Okay, Kaladin beheading the Pursuer. This scene is scary. And it's not scary because you're afraid for what Kaladin's going to do to the Pursuer, or what the Pursuer's going to do to Kaladin. You're afraid of what Moash just did to Kaladin and what Kaladin's about to do to himself. This scene, he finally lets loose and rips the head off the Pursuer and gives into his rage. Wow. His eyes start glowing a different color. I remember listening to that on my first read, my first read of the Rhythm of War, and wow, it is frightening, and the implications are huge, and you know the implications are huge because of everything you've just gone through learning about Stormlight and Voidlight and everything like that. He rips the head off the Pursuer, and the fight scene before that as well is so picturesque, where there's heavenly ones descending upon them but not going to interfere. Their robes are all mistborn-like and strands everywhere, and all the humans are gathered around to watch, and he humiliates the Pursuer. It's so good. The Rhythm of War's action sequences at the end are only comparable, I guess, to Words of Radiance, because Words of Radiance are right here. All right, the duel at the end of Words of Radiance. This scene is maybe the best action scene I've ever read in fantasy. Yeah, I'll just leave it like that. The dialogue is fabulous. Probably 9.5 out of 10. There's a couple cheesy lines in there. The only real critique I have of this is there are 2 published versions. If you didn't know that, there are 2 different canonical, well, one canonical, one published, where Kaladin kills Szeth or Szeth kills himself. There's a couple lines of published words that are different, which changes the definition for Kaladin and Szeth there. But anyway. Okay, the dog and the dragon. Okay, so Hoyd in Rhythm of War, the dog and the dragon is so good, such a well-written scene, and Kaladin finally wants a story, which is so awesome. Very tender scene, and the dialogue is fabulous. I think Sanderson got better at writing character, at writing dialogue between The Way of Kings and Rhythm of War, where the dog and the dragon feels way more down to earth than the Wandersail, which I don't think is necessarily a critique of the Wandersail, but it makes the dog and the dragon way more personal. And of course it lands higher for me than the Wandersail because it's such an important scene for Kaladin and where he is. Pretty much a direct allegorical story for Kaladin. You are expecting too much of yourself. Appreciate how far you've come, and you will be warm again. It's poetry. It's poetry from Brandon Sanderson. It really is. And finishing out A+ tier is Adolin's Honor Sprint Trial. Okay, so one of my all-time favorite Stormlight Archive scenes, obviously it's at the top of A+ here, is Adolin's Honor Sprint Trial. He goes to trial for all of humanity, in defense of humanity for the spread. He doesn't know how it's going to turn out. Obviously it turns out well for him because of his loyalty to Maya. But the reveals in this chapter are fabulous. The dialogue is some of the best dialogue in the Stormlight Archive, in fantasy in general. And the reveals are great. The reread is great. everything about this trial scene is great. I love Adolin. After this scene specifically, it's such a well-written scene, and I do think Adolin deserves this scene after everything that he goes through. Okay, and finishing up my tier list is S tier, obviously. The top of S tier, well, the bottom of S tier, I should say, the girl who stood up. To refresh your brain, this is the scene of Hoid talking to Shallan in Oathbringer. Shallan has just failed to protect a beggar boy. I don't remember his name, I'm sorry. But Shallan is so broken and so defeated, and I don't know what to say to this besides go read the chapter if you don't really remember this chapter, because this chapter is so poignant and so powerful for Shallan and what she needs to hear at this point, and what Hoid is willing to give as a mentor for all of our characters. The best Hoid tale, and it's to Shallan. I love it. It's fabulous. What more is there to say? Go read it. If you haven't read it in a while, go read it. And the next one, Moments. This scene is the end of Rhythm of War, and it is Kaladin talking to young Tien. Now, whether it is real Tien or fake Tien is a question I'll get back to in a second, but the dialogue in this chapter is so heart-piercing. It is so important for Kaladin to hear from his brother that he's good enough and he can be strong enough, and he was there for his brother, and his brother knew that. His brother turned and saw him before he died, and how important that was to Tien. It is such a good closing period on this death scene that Kaladin has never, ever forgiven himself for. He has carried it with him for so long. There's a line in Words of Radiance where Dalinar finally puts down, quote, Dalinar finally puts down the stone that he'd been carrying with him for 7 years, the stone being his brother's death. Same thing for Kaladin here. He has carried Tien's death with him for so long and has not been able to forgive himself for it until he talks to him in this scene and lays down the weight and accepts the fact that there are people he cannot protect. And it speaks for itself. I'm not going to say the word fabulous again because it speaks for itself. Now, this is part of, if you haven't seen my Mercy Theory segment in episode 132, 131 maybe, of the podcast, it's titled Mercy. Go read or go watch that. I have a whole theory that this is actually Tien, and not Dalinar's portrayal of Tien in a vision, because I think that is really important. If it is Tien, it brings such weight to the scene. If it's not Tien, it loses a lot of that weight. So whether that makes a big difference to you, I think it does make a big difference to me whether this actually is Tien or not speaking. But regardless, very good scene, very well written. I cannot get enough of this scene. I've probably listened to this scene 35 times, and I've read Rhythm of War twice. Okay, Bridge 4 returning for Dalinar at the end of the Way of Kings. Brandon Sanderson knew that he had something special when writing this scene. He knew when he gave this to his editor, or whenever this scene came to life. It's one of those scenes where it is defining of the book, defining of the book you're trying to write, the story you're trying to tell. And as he crafts this scene, there's no detail left to the imagination. It explains the entire scene. It explains the weight of all of these decisions. Kaladin's yelling at Syl that he should not be doing this. And I've been here before. You can't tell me to go save Elidi's when he killed my men. I have the chance to save in the entirety of Bridge 4. Sanderson spells out exactly how they can save themselves. They are free. And he goes back for Dalinar because he knows it's the right thing to do, and he should. It's the honorable thing to do. Oh, we talked a little bit on the podcast of how Spren choosing their appearance takes a little bit of weight out of this scene because Syl appears life-size, and during this scene you're meant to think that's really important, and it means something. It's just how Syl decides to appear at the time, which takes a little bit out of the punch. But Brandon Sanderson didn't know the rule at that point, I don't think, of Spren could just choose whatever they wanted. So for what it's worth, within the confines of this book, this scene, the best ending to any fantasy book, period. Coupled with this next scene, the second best scene in the entire Stormlight Archive is 2 chapters after Kaladin returns to save Dalinar. Dalinar and Kaladin go back to Sadeas and say, "I didn't die, surprise." And Sadeas says, "Leave my men here," with the intention of punishing them. And Dalinar gives up his Shardblade at the end of the Way of Kings, and he says, "What is a man's life worth?" to Kaladin for the bridgeman, slams it down in the middle of the Justice Cliff. Yeah, like I said, Sanderson knew he had something special with this story. And the fact that his publisher was willing to publish such a giant book to get to that line, and for it to have the weight that it does for the reader. When I read that line, I knew I wanted to read every Brandon Sanderson book there was. It's that good. I thought I needed to read every Brandon Sanderson book I could find, because that type of payoff for that type of book is exactly what I look for in media, in movies, in books, whatever. Beat only by the end of Oathbringer. I still don't know which I rate higher, Oathbringer or The Way of Kings. I have said Oathbringer, but I don't know if that's true. It might be The Way of Kings. Anyway, the only reason why this scene is rated higher than the 2 previous is because this culminates the 2 scenes previous as well. Dalinar has proved to himself that he can be honorable. He can do the right thing when he is given the chance. So it does not matter what he's done in his past if he accepts it and moves forward. And it is so, I cannot do this scene justice if I tried. It is such an important scene, the most important scene in the Stormlight Archive to date. We might get a more important scene in Stormlight 5. This is the most important scene in the Cosmere. Yeah, I'll say it. In the Cosmere, up until this point. The implications that this has, how you can defeat Odium by having a victory over your past self, and how he didn't think that was possible. The reread value is phenomenal. There's a graphic audio of this scene that is incredible. Michael Kramer's performance of this scene is incredible, of course, and Brandon Sanderson's writing is unparalleled in the history of fantasy. I believe this is the best payoff in a fantasy book, and I don't know if that's too controversial to say. I think a lot of people will agree with me. And with that is my Stormlight Archive scene tier list. If your scene that you were looking forward to didn't make it, I apologize. You can ask me in the comments and I can give my feedback on it. I will link this tier list in the comments and in the description if you'd like to take it yourself. And thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Till next time.